Today I'm going to do a couple of interviews from some experts on the direction of the stock market and the economy. Following that, I'm going to spend a lot of time focused on the U.S. debt level, the debt crisis, and Congress being wrestling through whether to raise the ceiling on the U.S. debt. That's going on right now. My name is Ben Reppond. Welcome to my YouTube broadcast. Today is January 24th, 2023. I'm going to start with an interview that Joe Kernan and Andrew Sorkin are doing with Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan. I've played many interviews with economists and money managers about their view of what's going to happen with the market and with the economy in 2023. A very significant perspective is that of Jamie Dimon. He has concerns about where things are going, and his view is different from others that I have played. He focuses more, he thinks the issue is more on geopolitical issues, particularly he mentions right up front the war in the Ukraine and Russia and the implications of that. And we just don't know how that's going to turn out. So that's kind of a wild card for 2023. And so listen to this while I play the interview with Joe Kernan, Andrew Sorkin, and Jamie Dimon.
First big interview of the morning, Jamie Dimon, Chairman and CEO of JP Morgan. Nice to see you, sir.
Happy to be here.
So you want to help us understand what happened in your mind between then and now?
Yeah, basically nothing. Okay, part of that storm clouds hit. Rates went higher than people thought. With stock markets down 20%, the IPO market disappeared. And the economy, of course, we all talk about it. It's like the weather. We don't really know, and I hate guessing about that. We should have a little humility. I've never seen anyone actually do it well. But the real issue for the world is Russia, war, Ukraine, energy, trade, and that is serious. And that's still out there. Hopefully it'll mitigate and go away, but it may not. So, as a risk manager, you kind of prepare for some of that.
But in terms of this question, we were literally debating just what happened yesterday in terms of how the markets are thinking about things compared to this morning, frankly.
The markets have always been wrong, too.
For a while.
I mean, listen, the way we run the company is to serve clients day in and day out through thick or thin. I know there are going to be recessions, up, downs, and downs. I really don't spend that much time worrying about it. I do worry about poor public policy that damages American growth. I worry about a lot of stuff, but not about whether, what the weather's going to be like. And of course, I don't want a recession because it hurts average Americans. I'm not for it, but I have to be prepared for it.
But I think there's a lot of businesses here that are trying to figure out what to do, what their budgets are supposed to look like, whether they need to raise more capital. Yeah. They'd have to call you for that. Yeah. That's why, so what are you telling them?
I think every business, any business, large or small, should prepare for a bunch of eventualities and then run the business to serve your clients. And, not worry that much about tomorrow's profit margins so are you building products and services and you can do a good job? And can you handle, the input and output prices going way up or way down?
Jamie, a global conflict probably would be bad for JP Morgan and obviously for all of us. Yep. We're in Davos. It's almost like the Russia problem, people almost have it on a back burner, like, oh, yeah, dictators are going to do what dictators are going to do. But we still have how many nuclear weapons? Russia still has how many nuclear weapons? We don't know whether that's a possibility.
I agree with you.
And for every panel on climate change, there isn't a panel on a nuclear holocaust.
The only thing that matters for the future of the world is how this thing plays out. Russia, Ukraine, and the humanitarian crisis. When I wake up every day and I read the missiles going into buildings and killing kids every day, and it's nuclear blackmail. This is the most serious issue, and in my view, could be an inflection point for the Western world 400 years. Like, do we get our act together to help win this war, help the Ukrainians, help rebuild Ukraine, and then negotiate proper trade relationship with China, manage...
That's what I was going to say. Do you look at this
That is the issue. That's not... The other stuff is the weather.
Next, I'm going to play an interview that Scott Wapner from CNBC does with Ritholtz CEO Josh Brown. Brown points out that the data is going to get worse from here. See, what happened in 2022 was that it was the anticipation of rate hikes. Are we going to have one? How much is it going to be? When is it going to happen, et cetera? And we're not dealing with that right now. I think most people agree that it's there's more rate hikes in front of us. They're fairly benign, and what happens after that, that's debated. But generally speaking, the view is, what are the implications of the rate hikes that have already happened, which have been very rapid? It pushed us into relatively higher interest rate area, and that has implications for the market and the economy and for us individually. Josh Brown points out that the retail sales report was bad. It was worse than expected. And the Empire Manufacturing Index showed a contraction in 5 out of the last 6 months. And the last one was twice as bad as they expected. Since the market has gone up recently for the last couple of weeks, some investors have gotten more optimistic about the future of the market. He cautions against getting too excited yet. He believes that the market will actually go down from here and that there is a lot of risk at these prices. Given where we are economically, he views that we are still overvalued. I agree. We took, with our clients, we took half a position, 50% exposure at the close on Thursday, and enjoyed the rally on Friday and on Monday. But we're not ready to add to that position at these prices. We have a plan on what it will take for us to exit and what it will take for us to add to these prices. Doing either one right now, I don't think is wise.
Though, with our talk of the tape, out of steam. That's how the market certainly acted today. The pullback perhaps pushed along by more Fed hawks talking about higher rates for longer, even as some suggest a soft landing looks more likely. For what all of that means to your money, let's welcome in Josh Brown. He is the CEO and co-founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management, a CNBC contributor. It's good to have you back right here with me at Post 9.
Loving it.
Kind of a nasty day.
Yeah.
Out of steam, out of gas, pushed over the edge by some Fed hawks. All the above. What do you think?
I think it's okay. Listen, I think it's okay. We've had a really big run. So far, we're just digesting that run. We were on the half yesterday talking about, look, we know the data is going to get worse from here. It's going to deteriorate. That's what you had today. Retail sales fell 1.1% in December. Negative 1% was expected. Doesn't sound like much, but that is the biggest monthly decline for all of 2022. So we finished the year in much worse shape than we were for much of the year, at least on that measure. Retail sales have now fallen 3 out of 4 months, Scott. That's notable. The Empire Manufacturing Survey was another one that got people's attention. This was the 5th worst contraction ever since they've been keeping this data. It was the weakest since March of 2009, taking out the COVID stuff. That really is a big asterisk. That's getting people's attention. That index is in contraction 5 out of the last 6 months. That print was twice as bad as what people expected. And so what I would say is, look at the 10-year, look at bond prices screaming, look at yields melting away. The market is now doing something very interesting. It's actually reacting badly to bad news. That tells you fear of the Fed is not the story this year. The story is, what have they done? Have they gone too far?
Well,
are they going to recognize it? That is the new paradigm we find ourselves in here in 2023.
It's fear of the Fed, just in a different way. It's of over-tightening.
Fear of what the Fed is already, that's retroactive.
Not only that, but what they're still pledging to do. You hear Bullard today?
Yeah.
Bullard 5.25 to 5.5, go 50 next meeting. Now, he doesn't have a vote, but nonetheless, his words matter, right? This is like, we're going, and we're going to stay there, and we're going to go more than you think.
Because you know why? because you can't undo everything that you've already done. You can't allow a 10% S&P rally to reignite manufacturing and retail sales and housing. Like, you really want to avoid having that outcome. And so what do? Well, you're not going to do 50 basis point rate hikes every month anymore. So the other tool you have is to just tamp down people's enthusiasm, make sure everyone knows you're going to stay vigilant, and keep the CFOs on track to continue firing people. I hate to say it that crassly. I hate to be the person that says it out loud. That is literally the thing that the Fed needs to continue in order for that 3.5% headline unemployment rate to decline. That is the only way they could declare victory. You cannot declare victory against inflation with the labor market as tight as it still is, despite the fact that we're hearing about big companies doing big layoffs. It just isn't enough yet, and so you're going to continue to hear the hawkishness.
Okay, now I'm going to shift gears. I want to go to jobs data. And depending on where you're located, if you're in a tech-heavy area like Seattle, San Francisco, Austin, you would be very aware of this. There are job cuts that are happening. Microsoft announced 10,000 people being laid off. Amazon, 18,000. Google, 12,000. And then there are lots of smaller firms that have also laid off. So the entire tech industry has laid off over 100,000 people. This chart shows that they've laid off 128,000. So that's a lot of people very recently that have become unemployed. With the market being kind of saturated and firms not looking for new talent, these people are very talented, looking for jobs, and there really aren't jobs right now. Now, that industry and those companies have become very bloated in the last, say, 2020 and 2021. So when 2022 happened, this was a shock. But this shows the magnitude just in the last year of the layoffs that have happened. I'm going to jump over from jobs. I'm going to jump over to housing. And this shows, now what's happened is that the housing market, now this is not true in every area. There are areas where housing is very different from this. So nationally speaking, the house prices have gotten very elevated up through 2021. Sometime during 2022, as rates, the overnight rate from the Fed went up, so did mortgage rates. They went from, many people could get a 2.5% to 3% mortgage, and they've now gone up to 6% plus. So you could say at least they have doubled, and in some cases even more. So what's happened as a result of that is that people who are applying for mortgages, who are buying homes, if your person's a cash buyer, it doesn't apply, but if they're getting a mortgage, which most people do, then the implication of that is that the home sales have dropped significantly. So this chart goes back to 2010, and it shows from previously owned homes, so this would not include new homes, brand new construction. They dropped to their lowest level, and you can see at the end of the chart on the very far right side, they have dropped to their lowest level in 12 years, down to the 2010 level, which was really at the heart of the housing crisis. The stock market went down in 2008, 2009, but that it lingered more because they were working through some of the adjustable rate mortgages and foreclosures. So this going down to that lowest level in 2010 is a very low level. So housing is, I'm seeing in this area, I subscribe to Zillow, and so I watch what happens with house prices in this area, and they are definitely dropping. So looking more at the global market, everywhere, but I'm just going to show China. This is Evergrande's issue in China. They're the biggest developer, property developer in the world. But this shows the level of homes, apartment buildings that were being constructed in China. This is just one city and just one segment. So it's the magnitude of Evergrande and the magnitude of housing issues in China is substantial. Theirs isn't necessarily just related to interest rates. This has gone on before 2022, but these are the kinds of projects that have in China that have been absolutely stopped. So, but in the US, for example, you've got residential housing, but it's also spilling over into commercial projects as well. This is an interesting chart because it shows the magnitude of the mortgages with rates going up as high as they are. What does that spell for first-time home buyers or anyone who's applying for a mortgage, I guess? What percentage of their mortgage payment or their mortgage payment is what percentage of their budget or of their income? And so we knew that during the late 70s, because interest rates went up so high and people were getting mortgages at higher and higher rates, we are at the highest level we have been since the late 70s. 45% of the budget, people's budgets on average, are being consumed with mortgage payments. And that's a function of interest rates. Well, interest rates and prices. So when you look at the issue of supply and demand, there's no question about the impact that this has on housing prices, and they are dropping because people cannot afford homes at this price. They just pass on it and they do something else. KB Homes is the 6th largest home builder in the US. This data comes from KB Homes. They have had 68% of the homes that have been under contract that they've been building have canceled. When a person cancels, I don't know the detail on this, but when they cancel a home under construction, they have made a deposit, a good faith deposit. I don't know that it's the level of an earnest money, maybe it's more than that, but an amount of money that they would forfeit if they walk away from that contract. 68% of the people have chosen to walk away from the contract and to forfeit their deposit rather than go through with it at these prices for the fourth quarter of 2022. When you contrast that with the previous 5 years, you can see the magnitude of the problem. People are just saying, no, I can't afford it. If this is the price I've got to pay, I'm going to exit. And a lot of this escalated. This happened during the fourth quarter. A lot of this escalated toward the latter part of last year and causing, I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, do they keep going? Do they just walk away from those homes that are under construction and come back later? I don't know. But these are being, it has an impact on the overall housing market. The overall housing market has got to compete with these new homes that are for sale. And if they go at cheaper and cheaper prices because people are forfeiting their deposit, it's naturally is going to have an effect on general housing prices. Now I'm going to shift. This is the main subject that I want to cover today, which is debt, the U.S. debt and even personal debt. So this shows, it's kind of a political chart, but it's an economic chart kind of combined together. So you can see, going back to 1980, in 1980, we had $1 trillion of debt in the U.S. Treasury. Today, that number, the last number I saw was 31.4 trillion. So from 1 trillion to 31.4 trillion in 42, 43 years. And it doesn't seem like long ago when it was 10 trillion or 20 trillion. It's escalated. What's interesting about the chart, So if you're of a Democratic perspective or a Republican perspective, I want you to look at this. So each person has got their own political filter that they look at data through. So this shows blue segments of time relative to the debt that Democrats were in power and Republicans were in power. Blue meaning Democrats, red meaning Republicans. So you can see that the damage to the national debt is just as bad for one party versus the other. If you think, oh, well, it's the evil Republicans or it's the evil Democrats. Not really. It's both. They both get into office. When have you heard a politician talk about the idea of reducing debt, reducing our national debt? I don't know that they even campaign on it. I've listened to people in their campaign speeches. Nobody's talking about it. It's a problem. It's a crisis. It's crushing our country, and they don't talk about it. And then they go back there and they do whatever they do that somehow allows all this to happen. This is ridiculous. So it's a U.S. problem. Both parties are culpable, and it is crushing us. So I wanted you to see this from a political perspective and realize that we are all in this and that both parties are in this. The only guy I ever remember that really railed against this, the only person in my lifetime I remember listening to was Ron Paul. And he's retired now, he was a congressman, but he thought this was horrible. And he voted against, raising the debt ceiling. He was, in favor of paying it off, in favor of paying the interest, paying it down, anything. And he's the only one. And there's like 500 and something, senators and congressmen. Anyway, I want to give you some more information. I want to play this clip from Janet Yellen. She was interviewed on CNN by Christiane Amanpour, and she's actually in Africa. So she's being interviewed while she's there in Africa. I'm sure she flew there in her private plane. And she's giving her view on the debt ceiling and the issue of debt in the U.S. And she's really making a case for we pay our bills. She's making a case for let's raise the debt ceiling. And she's not considering any other option. There are other options. It's like, no, let's just raise the debt ceiling. She doesn't say that really, but that's what she's saying. And so we pay our bills. We've always paid our bills. We have to pay our bills. And she's not dealing with the spending problem that we have. And so I want you to listen to this, and then I want to make some comments.
Secretary Janet Yellen, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
We're going to get to your meeting and your trip and your speech in Africa in a moment. But first, I want to ask you about something else really top of your mind, and that is the debt ceiling. You informed Congress that the debt ceiling has been reached and that you have to employ extraordinary measures to keep the whole thing going. How long can you do that for? What kind of extraordinary measures?
Well, extraordinary measures involve things like the Civil Service Trust Fund and investments that we make in government securities for employees in the government-funded programs. And I indicated in my letter to Congress that we feel confident they can last until early June. But beyond that, there's no guarantee. The actual date at which we would no longer be able to use these measures is quite uncertain, but it could conceivably come as early June.
Okay, so I want to just quote that letter that you are referring to just a little bit. Failure to meet the government's obligations would cause irreparable harm to the United States economy, the livelihoods of all Americans, and global financial stability. So in brief, what kind of irreparable harm, and particularly for American households, how would average American households experience this?
The United States is a country that since 1789 has always paid all of its bills. And the knowledge that the U.S. government can be trusted and counted on to do that underlies the foundations, really, of the entire global financial system. U.S. Treasury securities are the safest investment on the planet, and we would certainly experience, at a minimum, a downgrading of our debt. If that happened, our borrowing costs would increase, and every American would see that their borrowing costs would increase as well. On top of that, a failure to make payments that are due, whether it's to bondholders or to Social Security recipients or to our military, would undoubtedly cause a recession in the U.S. economy and could cause a global financial crisis. It would certainly undermine the role of the dollar as a reserve currency that is used in transactions all over the world. And many people would lose their jobs, and certainly their borrowing costs would rise.
So you heard what she said. She's making the case for paying our bills. I understand the idea of paying our bills, but think about this. What are the options? One of the options, instead of okay, let's go back to raising the debt ceiling. When we raise the debt ceiling, let's bring it back to you and me. We're regular people. We don't live in the world of the elites in Washington, D.C. So and you have a budget. And if you can't pay your bills, you've got some choices to make. So what do? You bring in more money. You go get a second job. You cut your spending. You sell your house and move to something cheaper. Whatever you have to do, you do something. And in order to make it work out, because at the end of the day, you've got to pay your bills. And it may be a spending problem. You could have fallen on hard times and it came out of nowhere, but a lot of times it's either a spending problem or, maybe it's a borrowing problem, but or income problem. So you can fix it with income, and you can fix it with spending. But the idea that we just have to borrow more money makes no sense, because when you bring it back to us, you think, okay, if you're in debt and you can't pay your debts, what do? Do you go borrow more money that you can't pay back and can't even pay the interest on? And then if you can't pay that, you go and borrow even more money? That makes no sense. But that's what we as a country are doing. So the issue of spending more than we take in just doesn't make sense. Now, I will admit I have more traditional values. I don't see it that way. I have no debt right now. I've had times where I have had debt. And most of the time, and if I look at the most debt I've had, and then today I have no debt, most of the time I'm somewhere in between those two. And when I'm talking about debt, I'm talking about consumer debt. I'm not talking about mortgage debt. And the country really is dealing with what's the equivalent in our world of consumer debt. So if we can't pay our bills, we have to make an adjustment. And but the country is looking at only one issue, and that is, let's just go borrow more money. When we can't, we do not, I don't know when we've ever paid our interest. So for 40 years, maybe we did for a year or two in there, but I think most of the time we haven't even been able to pay the interest, and we certainly have not been making payments. Imagine this. Think if Congress had the idea of, okay, we could disagree on this and this and this, okay, on how we do things and how we spend money. Okay, that's fine. One party's got one view, another party's got another view. But doesn't it make sense to you that on this issue we should be together, that we should live within our means, that whatever money we take in, that we spend that amount of money or less, and that we pay our interest on our debt, and then we make reductions in our principal, kind of like a mortgage. Some of your money goes to interest, some of it goes to principal, and over time you pay it down. Imagine that if the congressmen and senators from both parties got together, and the president and the vice president, Treasury secretary, they all get together and say, okay, how can we live within our means? How can we pay our debt? And we can debate what we spend our money on. That's fine. We have different views on that. But let's at least pay our bills and not have to ask to borrow more money when we can't even pay back what we have right now. Doesn't that make sense? Well, don't hold your breath. I don't think that's going to happen. I wish it would. But we seem to live in a world where both parties are completely okay with spending more money that we don't have, that we can't repay, and we can't even repay the interest. Okay, I'm going to shift gears. I'm going to go to the flow of funds report. Where's the money coming and going from? The money continues to leave, this as of last week, continues to leave conventional equity funds, mutual funds. 6.1 billion left mutual funds last week. Bond funds, however, experienced an increase in dollars going into bond funds. 4.8 billion went into bond funds, and money market funds had an outflow of 2 billion. Do you know what this building is? This is the Federal Reserve Building. The Fed. This is where their offices are. Do you know what you see in front of that? That is a fence. Do you know what's on top of the fence? It's barbed wire. When was it put up? Recently. So they put a fence up around the Federal Reserve Building. By the way, a lot of buildings in Washington, D.C. have fences around them now. But the Federal Reserve Building has a fence that took some effort and took some money to put that, an intention to put this fence up that has barbed wire on top. Why? Are they concerned about people breaking into the Federal Reserve Building? That's not where they keep their money anyway. Really, what's the concern? I don't know. I'm just scratching my head looking at this thinking, this is, to be honest, this is crazy. Or maybe they put it there so they wouldn't let the people inside out. How about that one? That makes sense to me, because they're kind of crazy too. So you think, okay, I don't know what's going on, but it just looks weird to me. So when I saw this, I thought, I don't know what they're concerned about, but they're obviously concerned about something. Okay. If we were sitting on top of a volcano, the volcano being our debt as a country, or maybe even individually, we get to a point where the volcano is big enough and explosive enough that it blows. And you see the people running down the hill scared that it's going to blow. Well, that's the correct response. But that's kind of where we are. And by the way, we're not the only country. Every developed country in the world is similar to us. We're about the 8th worst. There are about 7 developed countries worse than us when you measure it from a debt to GDP ratio. Nobody is sitting down, politicians and policymakers are sitting down figuring out, in any country, figuring out, how do we get rid of this? How do we not have debt? Because you and I understand the concept that we need to not have debt. If we have debt, we need to be in a process of paying it off or paying it down. We need to be focused on that. If we're not, if we just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, we know what the implications are. You're going to collapse. Financially, you're going to collapse. There's no way to create wealth that way, and there's no way to create growth. It's kind of an albatross around our neck. When I thought of this, I thought of the verse in Proverbs 22 that says, "The borrower is slave to the lender." Think about it. That's the way it works. And so it's a statement of avoiding borrowing money, both individually and as a country, unless we have to. If we're in a situation where we have to, then we borrow. I've been in those situations. Then find a way to pay it off, pay it down, pay the interest, pay the principal. That's the way it works. And so anyway, I just thought this little cartoon was a depiction of kind of where we are as a country and maybe where some people are individually, but it's a statement about let's not do that. I can't find anybody where I live that is going to run on the platform of paying off the debt or paying down the debt or not borrowing money to pay our bills and or even just paying the interest. But if I could find one, believe me, I would vote for him. Thank you for watching. And if you have comments or questions, leave them in the comment section below, and I will respond to your questions. Thank you.